A few weeks ago, something hit me on the head as I walked across the playground in a school where I was doing supply work. As I turned round, I knew immediately it came from a group of Year 10 boys. I'd sort of felt something was in the air, some mood in the air as I walked past them the first time anyway. I was only about 10 yards past them when I felt it. So I decided I'm not going to catch who did it, but I'll just take an opportunity here to talk. I walked across and I just said, boys, look, if you're going to do something like that, it's best not to turn around and look away or even walk away as some of your friends have done. It just makes you look guilty. Walking on, I bumped into a senior teacher that I know very well, and he asked me how I was, so I mentioned that I just had a little incident, which was a bit surprising given it was such a good school, never happened before. And he asked me what had happened and where it happened, and he said, well, there's a CCTV camera in that area, we may have it on camera. So I said, fine, that's fine, go ahead, let me know. So a little later on, a few days later, I heard that, true enough, they'd caught the boy involved and he'd been suspended for a certain number of days. At the time, I was disappointed that it couldn't have been handled in a different way, because I'm not sure that giving that boy detention was of any value. In fact, in general, I don't tend to think detentions are of much value. And I think that way because students live in the now, today, and a punishment sometime in the future is, I'm not sure, necessarily a good idea. I would have preferred, if I'd had the opportunity, which I didn't, to be able to offer that boy a different deal. How about this? Instead of having any punishment at all you have to do is stand up in Year 10 assembly and say that you threw something at Mr. Slevin. The school is one where I work quite a bit, so most of the students in that year group know me, although I don't think I know this boy in particular. That wasn't offered because that's not the way schools work, and it's not my business to make such decisions now that I'm only a supply teacher. But I recall when I was a senior teacher working in another school, when the issue of litter started to really bother a lot of staff, because especially during the summer months when the children were on the playground, on the grass, I should say, on the field, the litter left behind was a great upset to PE teachers and students for that matter. And the feeling was that students had to be challenged and tackled. The trouble was that the members of staff on duty didn't always feel like doing that, especially with the senior ones. I started a different approach. I brought a bag of a black plastic bag, a big one, and a litter picker. And I walked around chatting to the students as I did. And when I stopped, I just said, if you have any litter, drop it in here for me. It didn't take long for most of the students to be sort of, how can I put it, trained. They would hold on to the litter, ready for me to collect it. However, of course, if I didn't get to a particular group, they often left it behind. And now that I've read a lot about brain development and how a teenage brain differs from an adult brain, I think I understand what's going on. The students sitting in a group are not thinking about litter. Some actually really just love to throw stuff around and have no sort of concern, I should say, with anybody else's feelings. But not most of them. Most of them are just not thinking about it. So when they get up and leave it behind, it's not a conscious decision to leave it there. It's just that there was something more interesting to do, such as to run off and catch somebody up to talk to them about something that had happened earlier in lunchtime. The fact that a teacher comes along and starts to nag will actually aggravate the situation for many students, especially some with more assertive personalities perhaps, because they're not going to easily cave in to being told to pick up litter, because the classic response is, I didn't drop it. And of course, that may well be the case. So if we look at teenage behaviour, recent studies have found that there is a teenage phase in pretty much most animals. And in particular, where you can study them, they notice a similar issue to do with teenage behaviour with rats. So in a lab environment, it is possible to use rats and to do a little test. And what happened was they got teenage rats, which is a 31-day phase in the life of a rat, pre-teenage rats, who hadn't reached that stage yet, and adult rats, who had passed that stage. And in each case, they tried, first of all, an individual response, and secondly, a group response. So in the individual response, one rat on their own in a cage where they have, for the first time, access to a second supply of liquid, not just water this time, but one that's laced with a little bit of alcohol. The pre-teenage rats sniffed it and didn't touch it. The adult rats were the same. The teenage rat on his or her own would sniff it and take a little taste. Put 10 in a group, and the behaviour is pretty much the same, except the teenage rats now don't just have a sip, they have a lot of sips. I'm not saying they get drunk or anything, I'm just saying they take more. They take more risks. Teenagers take more risks and make less wise decisions when they are surrounded by other teenagers. Why? Well, because that is the audience that matters to teenagers. How I am perceived by other kids is what matters to me, maybe especially at this time, friendships for coming and going, all sorts of pressures, which as adults we tend to forget how bad things were or the nuances of how our friendships did or did not develop. And as a result, we sort of have this terrible habit of expecting a teenager to make decisions in the same way that we as adults would do. How often have I heard teachers say, "How dare you behave like that in my class? How dare you be so rude to me?" As if they're making the same choice to behave in a certain way as an adult would in the same circumstances. It's simply a different situation. So my response is that when I'm dealing with teenagers, I try to take account of the way they think and make decisions. I never use the phrase, "How dare you?" "How rude you are." I'd never use expressions like that. Instead, I try to have a discussion with a student away from the group. One simple thing I've noticed and now start to take account of is that when I call a student to the front to talk to them, they invariably stand at about 90 degrees to me so that they can actually pay attention to what the class are seeing and actually keep their eye on what other students can see. So now I have a routine. Stand in front of me, I point to a spot and I said, "Face me." And when they turn away, I say something like, "Who are you looking at? Who are you talking to? I thought you were talking to me. Face the front, please." And if that doesn't work, then I move them outside. But what I don't do is try to expect young people, teenagers, who are most concerned with how they are perceived by other teenagers, to behave as if they were an adult making decisions in the same way. I would suggest detentions are a bad idea. I think there has to be consequences, and the consequences have got to be designed to move the person, the young person, forward in their decision making. Surely as adults we can do two things. One, model good decision making, calm, emotion controlled behaviour rather than anger. And secondly, guide students, guide young people into better choices for their own sake, as well as for, in the classroom, the sake of all the other students in the room. Because our priority as teachers is to make sure learning is the focus in the classroom, not other types of student-centered behaviours.